What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video for the First Descendant today, we're looking at a bossing build for Lepic, kind of like going back to the roots here because this was one of the very first builds I ever did for the game back at the beginning of the launch of the First Descendant, as Lepic was the first Descendant that I picked out of the three. Now in concept, this build has been around for a super long time, but since Lepic got some love in Season 3 and we've had some new additions to the game since I originally made my build, like mutant cells and trigger modules and that sort of thing, I felt it was time to refresh this and kind of like just get back to blasting with that good old Mega Man arm. So what is there really to say about this? The idea, the concept of the build is very simple. You kind of like just want to empower his Mega Man arm, his overkill skill as much as possible, and then you want to shoot as many of these balls as possible onto the boss's face, chest, wherever you can basically get it onto. Of course, you want these to crit because critting means even more damage, and of course they also leave behind a giant burning sensation which further on damages the boss. Now this has always been very powerful, and originally, this was one of the most effective ways to essentially kill the Void Intercept bosses as you were climbing your way towards hard difficulty, and also then in hard difficulty fighting those Void Intercept bosses. But that hasn't really changed, and that's also because these bosses are kind of ass now, and they kind of like get completely and utterly dumpstered by just about anything that you throw at them. So being able to kill them very fast with Lepic or any other Descendant for that matter, let's be honest, is not that big a deal. However, Lepic does kind of like pull it off quite stylishly, and yes, in an ideal situation you are able to push out just an insane amount of damage that you can essentially one rotation on Deathstalker, making it just to the point where Deathstalker dies. Again, like I said, this is in an ideal situation where Deathstalker stands fucking still and does not fly around like an absolute fucking idiot, which let's be honest with each other, happens all the damn time. But still, this is pretty damn powerful. It's also worth noting that in situations where you do burn through that first rotation and you've exhausted yourself of all your balls, then also always remember that you have additional lives, right? You don't just have one life in a Void Intercept boss battle. So oftentimes if you're solo and for some reason you fucked up the rotation or something, or you just kind of like want to get another round out against a more difficult Void Intercept boss, of course you can just, you know, off yourself, and then essentially you get all your cooldowns back and you can just go in again. But yes, this is Mega Man Lepic, so let's have a look. So as always, we're going to go ahead and start off with the Descendant modules. Now, the Transcendent mod that we want to use is Firearms Master, so that much hasn't changed yet. The only other sort of one that you could potentially consider using would be something like increased efficiency, although the thing with increased efficiency is it ramps up the MP cost of the ball so much that essentially you don't really get as much value out of it as you do with something like Firearms Master. So Firearms Master is absolutely the way that we want to go here. Now what this does is it modifies essentially your character in such a way that when you reload you get skill range, and when you change weapons you get skill power. Of course, swapping from any gun to the Mega Man arm, which is considered a unique weapon, does activate Firearms Master, and then you do get the skill power. So that's pretty much how we get it. Now the other big change that was made with the, let's call it the quality updates for Lepic in Season 3 was how overclock works, but more, or maybe not how it works, but rather what it gives you, right? So overclock, the idea being that, and as I'm sure you saw in the footage, is that you essentially activate overclock, and then while overclock is active, you activate your fourth ability, overkill, and then you essentially just push out as much of these balls as you can within the duration of that skill. Now you can see that overclock has its own duration as well, but more specifically it also has a skill critical hit damage increase, which is the reason why we activate it and basically what we're after. Now when it comes to the modules of the build itself, of course, as usual, we want to be stacking as much damage into it as possible because of course it is a skill-based build, but as also usual, we're faced with the obvious choice of whether we want to build crit or non-crit. Now, in this particular case, you're looking at a crit version of this because in my testing, the crit version of this outperforms the non-crit version. However, I'm sure there's going to be other creators out there who prefer the non-crit version. I've certainly seen those videos around because this build has been around for a super long time. So people have tried many different ways to innovate it, many different ways to build it. But just in my testing and the way that I've gotten around to playing it and essentially the way that I've settled on it, I think that crit Lepic is basically where it's at. Now, since we are building crit, that means that a lot of our modules, 4 of our modules are already chosen for us, because we want to get as much crit crit rate as possible, and then we also want to get as much crit damage as possible to capitalize on that crit rate. So of course that means skill insight and skill concentration are 2 blue mods which give us critical hit rate and critical hit damage. Those ones are already chosen. And then of course emergency measures and front lines, which are our 2 purple mods, which do the same thing, just both on the same mod. So one giving more crit hit rate than crit hit damage, the other one giving more crit hit damage than crit hit rate, but still giving both of those are necessary. So that means that these 4 modules are already basically picked for us. Now, after that, there's a couple of things that we need to sort of bear in mind. Now, we want to maximize, and that word is very important here because it's going to determine the mods that we use. We want to maximize one pump chump. So we want to have as much power as possible for one full rotation of our overkill skill. That means that we can use 2 modules called maximize power and maximize skill. Both of these give us fairly large bumps, one to our skill power modifier and the other one to our skill power, but both of them incur massive skill cooldown penalties for us. In other words, whichever skills we're using will have bigger cooldowns before we can use them again. Now, by default, overkill has a pretty chunky cooldown, right? It's sitting at 70 seconds. So by using these 2 modules, we are now increasing the cooldown to 140 seconds. So as I said, it's not really feasible within one fight to essentially wait those 140 seconds to get your cooldown back. So more often than not, especially if you're playing solo, the easiest thing is just to fucking empty your arm on the guy. And if for some fucking reason they're still walking around and they're alive, you just go unalive yourself and then basically come back, and then boom, you can have all your cooldowns back instantly and rock and roll. So these 2 ones then basically giving us 2 massive big power increases. Next, what we also want to do is we want to make sure that our skill is available for us as long as possible. So our duration is important here. Now, by default, this is a duration of 8 seconds. Longer duration means more shooting. Yes, there is a cost component to it as well, but the point is that's mitigated by things like our external component set and that sort of thing. So the basic thing here that you want, though, is you want this skill to be available for longer, because more seconds in the skill means more bullets that you can fire out. Okay, so in that case, skill extension matters a lot for us here, because this gives us a skill duration boost of 36.5%. And then we can also use maximize duration, which gives us another 40%. Now, yes, this does have a skill power modifier, a sort of like deficit here of minus 21.1%, but we do have these 2 pretty big boosts that we're putting in there, which kind of like make that like a non-point, because the additional 40% of skill duration is so valuable to us. That means that we are going from 8 seconds to 14.1 seconds, which is almost double. We're almost at double, which means that just a hell of a lot more shots that you can push out. Then we have a few more module slots available that we can look at. Well, basically 2. Fire Syncytium here gives us a critical hit resistance increase, which doesn't really matter, but it does give us a fire skill power plus 10.2%, which is really, really good. Just some additional damage on top, like some icing. And then for our golden mod, we're using Dangerous Ambush. Now, Dangerous Ambush says that when landing a skill attack while the enemy is not targeting you, you have a skill power increase. This doesn't really matter to us. What matters to us is the skill attack against an immobilized enemy. You get this 49.8%. Immobilized enemies are bosses, like, for example, that you've hit enough that they go into like that slumped over state. And oftentimes you can push them into this state very, very easily with this build. And that's if they don't just survive the fucking raw damage that you're throwing down their throat in the first place. So in that case, if you do push them into a down state, you're going to get this pretty substantial increase to your damage profile as well. And that's just going to push out even more. So that's the build in its entirety over there. If you just want to take a screenshot or something like that. Then, of course, our trigger module, Power Beyond, is just the one that kind of like gives us the biggest sort of bang for our buck in terms of like just more damage. This skill power increase of 15% if you have a golden rolled one, a perfect rolled one, if I can put it that way, means that that's just a 15% on top, right? and you don't have to do anything to earn this. You don't have to use a skill to proc this or anything like that. That's just a flat increase. You can see it's underneath basic info, so this is just something that just gives you that damage bump just by itself. Next up is our weapons. And here's actually a little bit of like nuance that needs to be explained here, because generally speaking, when you play mobbing Lepic, then obviously what you want to do is you want to use something like Secret Garden, because the point is Secret Garden's unique ability gives you additional skill power on tech abilities, and of course your damage dealing abilities on Lepic are tech abilities, like for example your grenades and your overkill arm and stuff like that. So you just get some additional damage from that, which is obviously super good. However, what you have to bear in mind is that when you are using the overkill arm, you're actually not shooting with the weapon that's in your hands. You are actually changing from the weapon that's in your hands into the unique weapon, which is the overkill arm. Now, the unique weapon, the overkill arm, does not inherit unique abilities from whichever weapon you're holding in your hand. So Secret Garden is going to do absolutely fuck all for you there. However, as a stat stick, in terms of like the module stats on there, there is something that does carry over. There's one thing that carries over, and that is fire rate. Fire rate carries over fast, and it means that the more fire rate the weapon has in its modules that you have equipped when you activate the overkill, means the faster the weapon itself can shoot. And so therefore you can use something like Perforator, which has a sharp precision shot available to it and a fire rate up. These two modules are literally the only two ones that you need to put on, and then you have the best possible stat stick for the overkill arm right there. Now, the reason why we use sharp precision shot is because this actually allows us to ramp up by pushing the button down once to shoot the first ball out and then not letting go. Then just holding it in and just grinding out all the shots, and you'll see your fire rate will rapidly increase to the point where you're just hurling a shitload of these balls downrange. So this says when pulling the trigger, fire rate plus 4%, recoil minus 5, and firearm attack plus 6. And it says it happens every 0.4 seconds. Now, the reason why we use a impact weapon is impact weapons have the best version of the sharp precision shot module. All other weapon types have that have this module available trigger slower. So you'll see, like, for instance, I think general rounds weapons is every 1.5 seconds, and I don't remember what the other ones are. Like special rounds I think is 0.5 seconds, something like that. But sharp precision shot on an impact round weapon has the best speed, so 0.4 seconds. And since you're not caring about what actual weapon it is, it doesn't matter the fuck that it's a hand cannon. The point is you just want the maximum amount of fire rate to translate over into the overkill arm, so you push out the maximum amount of rounds. So that's pretty much it. That's it in a nutshell. What you want is you want this damage to essentially just be ramped up by the fire rate, and the best possible version of that fire rate ramp is on an impact round with sharp precision shot. All right. Then other than that, you don't need to do anything else on the weapon. The fucking substats don't matter. The cores and stuff like that for you moving around and shit, and you know, like that can help, I guess. But the point is the cores themselves. So look, you can see I have 3 fire rates on here. They don't translate. It's literally just what comes from the actual modules themselves. All right. Then when we move over to the reactor, of course, we want a burning mechanics reactor because we want fire and tech. The mounting, yes, is important for like another fucking day. Then the new patch comes out, which is going to take weapon mountings away. So that's not going to be a thing that's important anymore at all. So in this particular case, you have like a day to worry about this. If you're building this, wait until the October 1st patch comes out. Then you don't really have to. You have many more choices of reactors to use, because then really the only thing that matters is the substats. And speaking of the substats, of course, you want additional skill attack when attacking Colossi. This is a bossing build, so you're going to be using that to deal damage to bosses. So that's a super good substat to have. And you want to couple that with skill critical hit damage, because we are going to be critting with this build. And so therefore, this is your best power combo for essentially getting the most damage for your buck and the most damage per, bullet being fired out. In terms of your external components, Slayer is really good here. Even though you do have this skill cost deficit situation on there, the bottom line is the 26.1% increase to skill power is just really, really good. Slayer is not a defensive set by any means, so you do have to make sure that you mod max HP and defense on there. But just bear in mind, guys, this build right here is what I would consider the kind of like the epitome of a glass cannon. The idea is to shoot all your shit off before the guy kills you, so you deal damage first, you kill first before you get killed. That is the epitome of a glass cannon, and this is it right here. So this only has 7,200 HP. People are gonna go ape shit in the comments about this, and 40k of defense. But the bottom line is, like I said, you push out, you've seen the footage running at the beginning of the video, it pushes up so much damage that it's just ridiculous. All right, so external components, as I said, is Slayer. In terms of what substats you want on those components, you want the standard sort of like roundup of substats for a skill-based Descendant. So you want MP recovery out of combat and max HP on your auxiliary power. On your sensor, you want max MP and MP recovery in combat. On your memory, you want defense and MP recovery modifier. And then kind of like your processor, doesn't really matter, max shield, shield recovery modifier, toxin resistance, max shield, whatever, any of those things matter. This is the piece out of the four which matter the least. All right, so yeah, that's it. Then when we get to the arc tuning itself, kind of like an awkward way that you have to build this, because you have to try and get as much critical hit rate and critical hit damage, but you also do still want to get to your mutant cell, because your mutant cell is an excellent way for you to ramp additional critical hit rate. So you want to go all the way around here. You want to get up some skill cost reduction over here, then come around the top here, get yourself some additional skill attack when attacking Colossi, because again, like I said, really, really powerful for us. Skill power over here, and then at this point here, you come up here, you grab yourself all this skill critical hit rate here, and you grab yourself all this skill critical hit damage over here. Then you dip off to the side here, and you grab yourself your mutant cell, and the mutant cell that we're using is arc reload. It's a very simple one to kind of like understand, and it's one additional step that you basically have to, well, two technically if you want to be that guy, two additional steps that you have to put into your rotation as you go. So in the background right now, you can see what I'm doing. As soon as I fucking am able to do it, and as I'm prepping for the fight, I shoot one bullet off, I reload, that procs arc reload. In that point, I also hit my second ability, and at that point, I hit my fourth ability, and I roll cancel to not have to wait for the arm to proc up and get ready, and then I start throwing fucking heat. And that's it. Every single time with bosses you do that will, you know, make it that the fastest possible kill will occur from that. And essentially you'll be killing the bosses most likely long before you've actually emptied your last, you know, bullet out of your Mega Man arm. But yes, that's a simple rotation there. I will also just mention that, just for the sake of it, just like the skill is called Overkill, on most of these bosses, unless you're fighting like the Abyss boss, which you shouldn't be fighting unless you have the right element for it, and unless you're fighting like fucking Wall Crusher, because I have taken this build into Wall Crusher and it does push out a lot of damage, but the point is, after you've blown your load, then you're kind of like dead in the water for 140 seconds, so that's not great. Except for those two bosses, right? Those two, the rest of the bosses die so fast to this shit that, technically speaking, a lot of this prep beforehand and fucking reloading and blah 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 blah, all that is overkill. You deal enough damage regardless, so it is what it is. You're just gonna crush all this other content. So hopefully down the line they make these bosses viable again, so that Lepic can come out and fucking tan their hides again. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Then I would say probably last but not least is our inversion reinforcements. When it gets to our inversion reinforcements, maybe I can just move back to this side again. You can take deploy resonance device, because that additional little bit of skill duration there means that your fire burns a little bit longer. So yeehaw. I feel that shield particle reconfiguration is a little bit of additional survivability for us as well. So when you're hit by an enemy, it gives you this shield particle reconfiguration. That's if the boss, for example, does not fucking one tap you and you do take a little bit of damage. Maybe one of his little assholes on the side shoots you with a laser. Then you do get this additional survivability here, which is kind of dope. And then selective neurostimulation has a chance of giving you some MP back. So this just gives you a little bit of sustain and kind of like helps you out like that. Arc circulation tactic here doesn't really help us that much per se, because the point is, again, when we finish our rotation, we're kind of like dead in the water for 140 fucking seconds regardless. So it's not really going to mean that much for us in the long term. Of course, it goes without saying, use the Husky. He is the best pet for when you are dealing skill damage. And that's going to be pretty much it for the build. I feel like, for me personally, this build is still as fucking sexy as it's always been. It's just there's a lot less stuff to use it on now, because everything dies to everything now. So in that case, you don't really need a Swiss Army knife like this that is essentially capable of pushing a lot of damage downrange, especially if you're playing solo and it's just capable of really diminishing bosses life bars substantially. But that's not to say that's not going to be the case in the future. One of the things that the developers have mentioned is that they are busy thinking about ways that they're going to rework the void intercept bosses, the hard bosses, to kind of like make them viable to go back to fighting again. And when that does happen, unless they make some really big changes and give them all like a bunch of fucking skill damage reduction or whatever the fuck, I think this build will still slam them. So I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully I can dust off the old Lepic and get him going again. Let me know in the comments down below if you do still enjoy using Lepic a little bit. His grenade build, mobbing build is fucking great. And I tend to use that quite a lot in Axion, and it's possible that I might use this on the new ship or something like that. But I mean, there's a lot of Descendants that are really good at mobbing right now, so the sky's the limit. We got lots to pick from. But other than that, thank you very much for the support. Thanks for watching. Keep watching, tons more videos coming, and as always, fucking cheers.